Hello and welcome to Stratford Chefs School Open Kitchen at Home with Chef Eli, where today we will be looking as to how to break down a tenderloin, in this case, beef. To begin, we'll be looking as to where this cut comes from the animal, in this case the cow. We're going to see that the tenderloin runs alongside the spine, a part of the animal that is seldom used or manipulated, which leads to a very tender, lean cut of meat. Generally, the more a muscle is used, the tougher it becomes, requiring a slow, moist cooking method. A brisket will be braised or smoked for a long time to break down the connective tissue, whereas a tenderloin is going to be charred aggressively so that we can get Maillard reaction while still leaving the steak essentially undercooked to an appropriate level of doneness. Rare to medium at most for this very lean cut of meat. The whole beef tenderloin will be broken down as follows. We'll be removing the chain with our hands, separating the tenderloin tips on each end, leaving the center part for the Chateaubriand whole or tournedos if broken into individual steaks. To begin, we'll be starting with the tenderloin with the chain attached. If the chain has been removed by the manufacturer or butcher in advance, it would be indicated as a denewed tenderloin. Here in this case, we're going to be having the chain attached. We're first going to be starting mostly with our hands and removing any large excess pieces of fat or sinew before we turn the whole tenderloin over. We're going to be seeing that at this point, we're going to be removing any excess loose skin, mostly with our hands, but somewhat with the aid of our bony knife. Once we have removed these, which are essentially holding the chain together as a piece of glue, we're going to be able to start separating and removing this chain with our hands. So we're going to see that there's almost a pseudo smaller tenderloin that runs parallel to the entire tenderloin. We're going to be able to get our finger in there to separate in between and remove this simply by pulling it off with our hands. If it is connected, we can be using our knife just to separate it. This cut of meat of the chain isn't necessarily good for your steaks. This is something that we would be reserving in our kitchens to break down, grind up, and works as a perfect filler for our tenderloin burgers and or any of those types of fill, meatballs, etc. Once we have removed that chain, we're simply going to be, again, continuing with our hands as much as possible to remove any excess bits of fat. At this point, we're going to be seeing that there's a clear silver skin that needs to be removed. Ideally, we're going to be starting with the larger part of the tenderloin, which is also known as the head, and cutting towards the tail. You're going to have less abrasion on the meat that way, as opposed to going this way, which we're going to be seeing moving from the tail to the head. I'm showing both as an example, but ideally we want to be moving with our knife in as clear a smooth stroke as possible. The last thing we want to be doing is doing several or dozens of strokes so that we get a staggered or pyramid style effect with lots of cuts leading from the tail to the head. So again, start from the head to the tail, have the knife aiming towards the silver skin so that we're removing as little meat as possible. So here we see the silver skin removed and the tenderloin still in its whole piece, but with most of the silver skin and excess removed. At this point, we can start breaking it into its individual steaks. We're going to be removing any smaller pieces that are insufficient to build in size to a proper steak and add that to the grinding bits. From here, we're going to have a scale ready and we're going to be cutting in nice smooth strokes. We're going to be aiming for these for approximately 5 ounces. We're going to be seeing that where the tenderloin is thinner, we're going to have wider pieces to compensate so that we can have approximately the same size. We're weighing each cut as we go so we can adjust our cut to larger or smaller, keeping in close to that same ideal size of 5 ounces. In a restaurant setting, this will probably be reserved for a sous chef or senior position to ensure that we have uniform size to control costs, portioning, and ensure that we're cooking for approximate even times. So here we're just continuing to remove this steak by steak, approaching that head. At this point, we're going to see that we can remove in between where that major part is and remove that secondary tri-tip part. We're going to be removing any cartilage parts that was in between where those two muscle groups are. We're going to weigh that tri-tip piece. If we can get 2 steaks out of this, we're going to measure to estimate, cut in half, and then measure accordingly. So here we've garnered 2 steaks out of that tri-tip. We're then going to be continuing with the remainder of that head portion of the steak and continuing to break this into 5-ounce portions. For those that are a bit wider, as we are getting into this elongated piece of steak, steak. We can be supporting the edges of the beef when we're done by either wrapping it with twine and or bacon. The bacon's going to be providing flavor and the twine structure. So here we see the tenderloin all broken down into 15 steaks, approximately $5 a piece if we're to purchase this from the grocery store in the $70 to $80 range. Great value for a great cut of meat, leaving behind some grinding for burgers as well. Bon appetit!